do you think it's easier to implement X2 in a new build as opposed to retrofitting an existing building that you're already in, or does it not matter?
I love that question because my
Yeah.
answer has changed since we kind of set
Oh,
off on building X2. Because I would tell you initially the thought was it has to be the nicest, newest, baddest building in any market. And as we did our research, which was pretty extensive, and as Preston mentioned a little bit earlier, but we toured a lot of assets, office assets, hotels, co-working spaces. We tried to collect a lot of data before we built this business. But what we found after kind of reviewing that data and reviewing the on the ground information from our markets was really that those new, really highly quality trophy buildings didn't need additional services and additional efforts and resources focused on customer experience because the physical attributes and typically locations kind of took care of everything. Maybe like, a Ferrari compared to a nice Mercedes.
yeah.
And so, what we looked at was that it was that next tier, the buildings maybe that were built 10 years ago or 20 years ago or even sometimes 30 years ago that had some physical constraints that prohibited it from competing with those brand new trophy, brand new properties. And so we really started to focus on the assets that were a tier or two below the brand new, shiniest building in each market and found that the impact of elevating the experience and focusing on the customer was significantly higher because of the physical constraints and the situation in each of these markets. And as I mentioned, Jay, the initial data has pointed to that's been true.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It makes perfect sense, right? That if you're going to lead with human capital and sort of customer experience differentiators on the interpersonal level, that if you've got the greatest view and the best everything, that might get overlooked a little bit. I think that's really, really a fascinating thing that you've uncovered there, Adam, and certainly helps the organization probably plan out which buildings are going to be X2 in the future. I have a question about that, actually. I wanted to ask you. I don't think we talked about this before either. Do people in the building know that they're being sort of X2ified? Is there like we put a window cling on the front door now with X2,
Yeah.
and what's the messaging to them? Like, sorry, we weren't that good at before, but now we're going to be great. It just feels like a little bit of an awkward rollout to me, or maybe I'm not getting it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and we've had that question asked multiple times, including asking ourselves that question. And I would tell you that we are agnostic to how much or how little branding X2 needs and wants to be at each of these buildings. I think
Okay.
one of the unique things about our industry is that there's a lot of conflicting brands at the property level, from who the equity investor is to maybe who the local operator is to who the property manager is to the leasing. And as Preston mentioned earlier, we sometimes do all of that, and so it's pretty easy to just throw X2 by stream on that. But when we are doing third-party services and representing a big institutional investor, and then we have a property management team and our leasing team, and then we have X2 layered on top of it, we have to become somewhat agnostic to what the building brand is, what the equity investors brand is. And so at the end of the day, we hope that we're building some brand equity and brand loyalty across markets and specifically in markets. But we hope that our main goal is just if we're looking to change the way that people experience the office, we're looking to do it through our people, and whatever logo they're wearing or whatever the name of the building is, we're indifferent to.
Yeah, and at some point they're going to experience the difference, right? That's the whole point, is that it's an experience you can feel, not necessarily an experience you need to be told about. It's like Fight Club, right? Like, at some level, if you're doing it right, you don't have to tell them about it because they know it's different.
That's maybe a new tagline, X2. It's like Fight Club.
It's like Fight Club. Yeah, that one's free, guys. You can use that. You guys do that. A question I would have on sort of picking buildings and sort of back to that idea, Preston, are there particular markets or geographies that you think are more apt for this kind of program, or does that not really have a bearing on it?
less of a bearing than you would think. I think, if you're talking about tenants that are, selecting a Class A Tier 1 or Tier 2 asset, there's a lot of self-selection there in terms of them,
Yeah.
placing a premium and high quality of service. I think, though, that, in a somewhat odd way, maybe in some of the office markets that are not doing as well, the ownership has certainly had a higher level of receptivity, right? I mean, this is a new concept. Commercial real estate has kind of done things on the property management side the same way for decades. And so there has been, some learning that's been required by some owners to adapt whether the cost benefit of X2 is there or not. Well, if your project is languishing, but has historically done well, and the asset quality has stood the test of time, you have an owner who's much more receptive to try something new. And so that has been, a little bit of an easier entry point for us versus maybe a project that's 95% leased in a really hot submarket. And so, hey, nothing's broken. Why try to implement anything that, could result into the negative? So, yeah, I would say we've seen the rollout. DC has been highly successful. Adam talked about the buildings that we rolled out there. In spite of that submarket, or a couple of the submarkets that these assets are in, or to the contrary. But I think, to me, that even underscores even more the value of it, because the leasing fundamentals have grown substantially there. And you certainly could make the claim in other markets that, well, they just had the wind at your back in a really good bull market. Well, it's been anything but that in the D.C. market for several years now.
I think, fortunately, also adding to that is that for our customer, maybe different than the airline industry or even maybe the hotel industry, our customer, i.e. the tenants, want pretty much the same thing in all markets that we're in and markets that we're not in, from New York to Chicago to Dallas to Los Angeles. What's interesting is that the specifics and the curation around each of those customers is different, right? As you may imagine, a tenant in New York wants something different than a tenant in Austin. But at the core, which is obviously why we created X2, is they want to be heard, they want to be treated well, and they want to have problems resolved quickly. And so if we can do all of those things and then add specific things on, and we can pick on Austin because I'm in Texas, but keep Austin weird, they do things a little bit different in Austin than they do in our DC location. And
Even
so
Dallas, for that matter.
right.
Yeah.
And so fortunately for us, this is pretty consistent across all of our markets. It's just getting into the specifics of each of these submarkets and the specifics of these tenant demands where we get the opportunity to curate it.
Preston, you alluded to this earlier, that there is a fee associated with X2, right? So there is it's a premium service with a different price point than sort of non-X2. Did I get that right?
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So is the idea then to take existing buildings where you are either property manager and or owner and say, okay, we used to do it the traditional way, now we're going to do it the X2 way? Or is it, let's go get new property management opportunities and displace existing competitors because now you're the X2 guys?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it's certainly a combination of both. I think what Adam and I and the rest of our teams have been doing is really looking at the competitive landscape in all of the markets that we're in, and really seeing which assets, based on their location, based on their architecture, based on their age, based on the ownership, a lot of different things, which ones are most suitable for an X2 rollout, and really talking with all of them. And so that's been our approach.
Yep.
And so if you look at the assets that we've converted over to X2, you look at the ones that are in the pipeline right now, where we'll have some announcements here in the next few months on, it's a combination of new and existing alike.
Adam, how long does it take to sort of do that switch over, to go from conventional to sort of X2ify a building? Obviously, probably depends a little bit on the building, but is this like a 30-day turn, a 6-month turn? I know you're talking about hiring new people and changing job roles.
Yeah.
I'm sure retraining, reskilling people.
Yeah, good question. So it's typically about 90 days from start to
Okay.
finish, and majority of that is on the hiring side.
Yeah.
Because as we mentioned, we typically are hiring a brand new customer experience manager, which takes a little while. But, fortunately for us, kind of the behind the scenes stuff, from the accounting to the engineering of these buildings, negotiating vendor contracts with security providers and janitorial providers. We've been in that business for 27 years. And
Yeah.
so
Got that
we
part
do
on
that in our sleep, which, I think even the traditional property transition is typically 90 days. And we're doing this elevated property transition in 90 days because we've been doing kind of the stuff people don't talk about for 27 years, and we're really, really good at it. And so we're fortunate to have a really strong foundation of kind of the fundamental property management services like accounting and vendor management and staffing, just to add on the elevated experience, scope of services and staffing and technologies that we've implemented with it.
The fact that you've got real ROI on this program now, just even in the last few months, is extraordinary to me. Not only the Net Promoter Score, but retention and renewals and inbound inquiries. It's amazing. But Adam, I think I know you well enough now to suggest that you are probably wondering how long it's going to take for other people to steal this idea. And then how do you protect it, right? Somebody else is going to be the Z2 or something, right? And then you're like, now what? It was our idea. So how do you build a defensible moat around this?
Yeah, great question, Jay. And I guess I should say I probably expected that question as I've gotten to know you
We
as
probably
well.
shouldn't be recording and releasing this.
Right.
Is probably what we should do. But okay, your word.
Yeah. Listen, I think fortunately for us, if I try to kind of bring it back to Business 101, it's, we've taken, from my standpoint, a commoditized business and tried to decommoditize it, which was obviously part of the business strategy and, where differentiation and strategy comes around. When I look at our competitors, I really see them kind of stuck in the commoditized business. And that's worked out well for them. And typically in the commoditized business, if you're the biggest and the cheapest, you can be wildly successful in any industry, including commercial real estate. What I'm fortunate, to have, and Preston and I and all of our colleagues are fortunate to have, is that we're a privately held, smaller company than a lot of our big competitors, and we can pivot and we can be agile and we can be flexible really, really quickly. And in some cases, even to the extent of doing things totally new and different, like X2 has been, and which we've been working on for about a year and a half. And so, I think at the end of the day, to try to combat our competition, replicating what we've done in X2, I feel like we have the first mover advantage, fortunately, because we saw this opportunity a year and a half ago and have only tried to take it quickly as we have done. And then I think that ultimately it starts and ends with our people. And I think that we have had for our entire existence the best people in the industry, and as we continue to grow over the 27 years, we've kept that front and center, and that starts with the people inside of our walls, and that starts with all the future people that start to work here. And so if we can attract and retain the most talented people in our industry, and in X2 attract and retain the people that are laser focused and at their core customer experience, I think that we can continue to outpace the competition and hopefully become the leader in changing the way people experience the office.
That's a really interesting point you made there about when you really get X2 deployed, it can make Stream an employer of choice in a really interesting way as well, right? Because people want to work in an X2 building, but people in your industry want to be workers in the X2 environment, right? So you're getting different, better, more creative, more innovative, more problem-solving people on your own team as well because of this initiative. That's actually not something I'd ever really considered before, that it actually helps your own staffing in your own organization by sort of redefining what it means to be in tenant services, et cetera.
I would tell you, I'd love to take credit for that idea, but I have to give credit to Mr. Horst Schulze, who was basically the founder of the Ritz-Carlton, in reading his book, Customer Excellence. But, I think one of the most important things I've learned in this journey and really spending a ton of time learning customer excellence and customer service and customer experience has been that all the training, all the strategies you work on is geared toward the customer, but it's equally, if not more importantly, geared towards your colleagues and your coworkers. And I think Mr. Schultz did that incredibly well, and he talks a lot about it in his book, if you've read it, is that all of this customer service training, all of these strategies, all these standards we're putting in place should be applied to the person standing next to you and the person standing on the other side of you, and how you treat, how you speak, how you dress, how you react, how you address service recovery, the same way as their coworker with the the most important customer that you're facing. And I think we, in rolling out our legendary CX training across the company, took that very, very seriously, and hopefully, to your point, Jay, have created a place where people want to work and are excited to come to work and to provide the highest level of service.
Well, you're definitely on the right track. I mean, it is mathematically proven. I've actually done a lot of research on this point in my own business, but you cannot deliver exceptional customer experience without first delivering exceptional employee experience. One begets the other, and that's not just sloganeering. That's like a proven fact. I actually did an analysis once where I ran a correlation study on best places to work companies and then Net Promoter Score, and the correlation is like extraordinary, and that's not a surprise, right? People who like their job and like the people that they work with are going to naturally let that slosh over into how they deal with customers, and so yeah, I think it's a very forward-looking approach, and I'm delighted that Stream is taking these steps. It's got to be a little bit, Preston, like, wow, we probably should have thought of this 25 years ago. But as is often true in commercial real estate, people have a if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mindset sometimes.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, another reason why we're pretty confident in the success of X2 is it is, in its essence, what Stream is and what a Stream has sought out to do. Our 4 values are nice, smart, honest, passionate. It's that simple. And that's been the way since 1996. And, I like to go back to, the Steve Jobs analogy on when he came out with the AirPod, or excuse me, the iPod. And everybody was saying the same thing. Well, aren't you worried about Microsoft copying you? And they did. It was called the Zune.
Yeah.
And nobody knows what a Zune is today. And it's because it didn't last, because it wasn't put
good.
out by the it wasn't any good, and it wasn't put out by the leadership and endorsed by the leadership within Microsoft. It was just a haphazard way to see that, okay, wow, our competitive companies come out with something, we need to do something to combat that. But it didn't last. Didn't have the full support of the leadership. Wasn't really well thought. It wasn't a major strategic initiative of their company. And X2 is embraced at the highest levels of Stream because all of us at one point were brokers, within the leadership at Stream. And we have seen firsthand when we were out in the trenches leasing or tenant repping office space or industrial space, the impact that a quality customer environment can provide. And so why not provide that? And so it just became abundantly clear throughout COVID that the trend was not coming this way, but here, and because of our nimble nature, we had the ability to act very quickly.
Adam, how long until, maybe this has already happened, until you've got existing Stream clients and properties saying, hey, how can we get us some of that X2, and how come we haven't got X2 yet? Like, are you starting to get that? Like, where's my X2? And if you're not yet, you will eventually.
Yeah, not yet, but hopefully we get there very quickly, Jay. But I would tell you, I think a major reason we've been somewhat in stealth mode as we've gathered the data and the measurables behind it, because we wanted to be 100% certain that what we were doing was actually creating ROI, as we've talked about. And fortunately, everything we've been doing has created ROI, as the measurables speak to, over the last 6 months. We plan to have a lot more conversations across the country over the coming months, and I believe, especially based on the initial data, that we will be getting a lot of those calls and saying, how about X2 and why not X2? And so hopefully from your mouth to God's ears.
Yeah, I know it's going to happen, no question. I mean, once you document it, right, then people will be like, oh, there's a there there, right? And that's why I think it's so smart, the links that you've gone to actually put math around this, because look, commercial real estate is a business that's driven by ratios and formulas and math. Like nobody's like taking anything at face value. So the fact that you actually have real data points around it, I think, is going to make all the difference in the world. Because otherwise, I think the orientation in this industry is, yeah, okay, you treat the tenants nice, like I mean, they're just that doesn't it feels fake almost, right? So
Yeah.
That was a great impression. You sound like a lot of them.
yeah, no, I've been there. Preston, I think one of the other things we haven't talked about that I wanted to touch on briefly is not only do we have sort of very specific ROI in terms of in this building more people are renewing leases, et cetera, but isn't it true that if this really flowers the way we think it will, and already evidence that it has, that actually creates more value for the property itself? Like this building is more valuable at sort of the macro level, not the individual tenant level. Is that a story that's worth telling?
100%. 100%. I think one of the first things you learn when you sit down in that first finance class in college is that anytime you have uncertainty, it's looked at negatively in the financial market. There's never a time when you look uncertain and say, oh, the market could be going up. No, if it's uncertain, it's negative. And so at its essence, X2 creates more certainty of the cash flow stream of the office building. With that value, yeah, when you're valuing anything, there's a multiple assessed to it. And so with that value, if there's greater certainty, there's generally a higher multiple that's tied to it. So that's the direct correlation.
Yeah, love it. Adam, last one for you before we wrap it up. What has surprised you in the last few months of rolling this out? I think it was one property last time we talked. Now it's 5. I'm sure there's been some things you didn't expect, positive, negatively. What's been? Oh, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, fortunately, we did a lot of research and a lot of planning, so there hasn't been any extraordinary surprises. And I give all the credit to our local teams that are really running these buildings on a day-to-day basis. But I think the one thing that has surprised me most has been that tenant events are very, very individualized. And as tenant events that I believe would be really, really powerful and well-attended have not been. For example, I like working out and I like doing yoga, and so we rolled out some pretty extensive fitness tenant engagements in our downtown DC buildings, and they were not very well attended. But the minute we did a wine tasting event, 50 people showed up on a Thursday afternoon to go through wine tasting. So I think what we've learned and continue to learn is that each building has individual needs and wants, and we need to be highly, highly cognizant of those and really address it on a curated, customized basis. And I know if we need a tequila event, who to call, Jay?
You want an X2 tequila tasting event in every building in this country, you've come to the right place, my friend. And I am not at all kidding. We actually do that. We do a lot of tequila education classes and tastings for corporate clients all over the country. So, yeah, we can make that happen.
You're hired.
And
We
I
will
guarantee
make-
we'll get
we will
more
make
people
that
tequila
happen.
than yoga. I guarantee
Yeah,
I'm taking
we'll-
a personal challenge.
We'll put you as the chief tequila officer, at a couple of these projects for sure.
I always thought that's what CTO stood for. And apparently it's not. That was a shock to me, actually.
Not yet.
How many more buildings are you going to roll out next year?
We hope to roll out a couple dozen. So
Wow.
we've got, 15 or so days to get ready for 24. So
That's
we're ready.
exciting. I had no idea. A couple of dozen more. Wow, you're really scaling this thing now.
Yeah, again, we're fortunate to have all the systems in place in all of these markets. And so these aren't new entries, maybe like a traditional kind of new business. We
Yeah.
have 90% of the necessary resources and elements that we need to open in X2. And so fortunately, we've got almost a half dozen up and running, and we have the data and the information of how to do it. And so it's just getting the right opportunities and getting going next year.
And getting the people. Yeah. Preston, when you tour some of these buildings, does it feel different? Like, this is probably a stupid question, but like when you're there on site and you're like, this is a building that has X2, does it just have a different vibe, or am I reading way too much into this?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you go into most office lobbies and, you're not greeted immediately, and it can have a rather kind of cold, welcoming experience. And X2 is anything but that. I mean, you look at the top hotel lines and brands around the world. Architecturally, they're all very similar. They all have very similar amenities, like we've talked about on the office side. But where people really pay up is for that service, and so that's something that we're seeking to replicate. And so if you can, all of a sudden, if you're going into work every day and you're greeted by your first and your last name, that's something that's very rare in most office environments. And it's little things like that that people really pick up on, and they may not even know it. A lot of times, just subconsciously, where all of a sudden it's a little thing here, little thing there, and there's just something different about this place. And yes, 100%. You walk through there, it may not come to the front of your brain, but particularly after a series of times that you've been there, that you're in a very special and unique place, and that's the goal.
I love that. Let's demonstrate it. Next time we have a conversation, let's do it in a building. Let's do it on site.
It's a great idea.
And actually, really dig in. Maybe even interview some people who work in the building. Like, hey, what's it like to work here? Like, let's make a little movie. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I appreciate it. Gents, congratulations on the success. Wow, you've come a long way this year, and what a crazy year to do it too. Really appreciate your time, and congrats on the progress. Cannot wait to see where this goes next. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Jay. Really appreciate your time.
Jay, thanks so much.
Always a pleasure.